I work with creativity. And I'm fascinated to see what it is that triggers creativity. And I feel almost personally insulted when I read that online is killing creativity, because I have firsthand evidence that it doesn't. And I think we're missing a great opportunity on many levels if we shut down the opportunity to enhance creativity and to find different ways to measure creativity and to encourage creativity.
We're in search of new rules for work, evidence-based practices fit for a hybrid world. This year, we're hosting a multi-month interdisciplinary research project looking for the best ways of unleashing team creativity. Join me, David Mastronardi, and my New Rules for Work co-producer, Elise Keith, as we explore the minds and the work of the people shaping not just our project, but the new rules for work. This project is made possible through the generous contributions of many people who are volunteering their time and through the support of our partners. To learn more about the project, buy tickets for January Symposium, register your team for the experiment, or partner with us, check out newrulesforwork.com. If you want to get in touch directly, email info@newrulesforwork.com.
We're talking today with Myriam Hadnes. She is a behavioral economist by training, the host now of the Workshops Work podcast, and a devoted facilitator. Motivated by the vision that we can change the world one workshop at a time, she curates the global Never Done Before community that explores the edges of the art and craft of facilitation. Personally, this is one of my favorite communities of facilitators to participate in. So if you haven't explored them before, definitely check it out. And you're going to see why that's important as we talk to Myriam. Because Myriam applies scientific insights about human behavior and group dynamics, along with her learnings from the experts on her podcast, to help everyone unleash the power of groups. Thank you so much for joining us, Myriam, and for being an advisor on our program.
Thank you so much for having me. It is a delight.
Where are you coming to us from, Myriam?
I am now physically in Amsterdam, the Netherlands.
Is there another part of you not physically in another place?
Good question.
That's a maybe. In the past 2.5 years, Myriam, and through your lens that you look out at facilitation, group dynamics, how has this world of workshops and facilitation changed?
2.5 years sounds like since the beginning of the pandemic, when the world suddenly moved online, and many of us, and when I say us, I mean facilitators, thought that we lost our jobs and we'll never be able to make an income again. And then we found out that actually it's a bliss in disguise, because I think the world has discovered that having successful meetings is something that is a craft and has to be designed. And going online has become like an amplifier that we realized how inefficient our meetings were. And I think we have also discovered how deep we can go and how effective we can work together and collaborate if we're not in the same space. And I'm saying if we're not in the same space, I'm not saying despite not being in the same space, because I believe that we can go deeper and we can collaborate more effectively online than we do or did offline.
So looking at it that way, and maybe we could only look back and say what the limitations were now that we've been forced maybe to look forward into the digital way of doing things. But I'd be curious, I'm sure a lot of people might be, what were some of the limitations maybe we can only say we know of when we were gathering physically that we might not have been aware of before this shift?
I'm thinking of two immediately. One is when we're sitting around a table with more than 4 people, there's only one person who can speak at the time. And usually when we sit around the table with more than 4 people, there is only one person speaking at the time. And the rest is mostly disengaged when we think of the standard normal meetings. When we're sitting in a physical space, we are not necessarily aware of that, because if we are bored, we turn to our neighbor and we start a parallel conversation somehow. When we are online, we cannot do that anymore. So we are stuck in front of our screen and are not participating. We're not engaging. So what do? We open another tab and we go down the rabbit hole of our emails, for instance. So I think the moving from offline to online has shown us that we need to design the conversations in a way that everyone is really engaged and everyone is participating. And when we're talking about more creative sessions or workshops, it is similar. Maybe for workshops, we have known before that there is a need of a facilitator and an agenda and a flow, but still, the larger the group, the more ineffective it is. And I think this is something that we have experienced online that we might have neglected offline just because we had opportunities to save ourselves. Just turning to the neighbor and doing something different, having parallel conversations. And the second reason why online is better than offline, or what was broken offline, is that there's always someone listening. There's always someone listening, there's always someone looking. So if we're sitting next to each other, even in small groups, and we have a conversation, the facilitator, someone can always listen to the words we are saying. So even in small groups conversations, it's never really private. So we'll very rarely get to a point where we can go deep and connect on a human level, especially when we're in the context of organizations, of professional, air quotes, environments, where we usually don't talk about personal stuff. Whereas when we're in a breakout room on Zoom, or in any breakout room, nobody can listen to us. So we're in a real private conversation, and we have the opportunity to meet someone where they are, literally. And I think that's a huge opportunity to get to know each other and to dive deeper in a conversation.
So just to summarize, to make sure I got those, it's harder to mask disengagement online, where it was easier to mask that behavior when we were all in the same place. And it's easier to go deeper, or it's harder to go deeper when you feel like you're being watched and everybody's listening to that, even if it's the hushed conversation. It's easier to do that when you're in a separate breakout room. So you're able to go deeper, like you said, meet people where they are in the virtual space.
Yeah. And if I may add a third point, because there's always a magic 3, right? I think it's more democratic. If we think of the physical space and we say, form small groups, who are the personalities who would form a group with the highest paid person in the room? Who are the ones who would stand up and walk in front to put their sticky note on the wall? Who are the ones who stick around at the end after the workshop to go to the bar and have a little chat with the CEO? It's a very specific type of person who have the confidence, maybe the privilege to do that. If we are online, it's, air quotes, the Zoom gods who decide who is matched with whom, who is discussing with whom. So everyone has the same chance of being in a small group conversation with the highest paid person, and nobody has to stand up and to walk and to expose themselves in front of a group to put a sticky note on a whiteboard.
Everybody's handwriting is the same online.
Also, yes.
Yeah. Organize the community with facilitators, the name of it, never done before, implies bleeding, cutting edge. What are some of the things, how were some of the ways at the beginning of this, going back to those 2.5 years, that the community was adapting to this? What were some of the techniques that they were bringing in, and how did the shift happen?
So the community was actually born in and from the pandemic. So the idea of Never Done Before came up earlier because I experienced going to conferences and always leaving with this feeling of, been there, done that. When am I finally experiencing a workshop that shows me a new technique, a new perspective, a new way of engaging participants? And I called my podcast guests and asked them if they would be up for organizing a conference with the only condition that they have to do something they've never done before, just to, by definition, have something new and something more exciting. And when the pandemic hit, one of the podcast guests challenged me and said, Myriam, why don't you do this online? I was like, oh, it would even have a Zoom license. Back then, I didn't even know how to create a breakout room. And it was, and maybe this actually made it even easier because we started all at ground zero, or most of us, with, okay, here we are. It's maybe for the first time in history that every one of us had permission to say, I have no clue how this is going to work. So everyone was in the same position of having permission to just experiment, to try out and to fail. And I remember how patient we all were if something didn't work out. So I think it was the perfect ground to test something like Never Done Before, where we're like, okay, we're all here to learn. And I think the beauty that I didn't even anticipate when we started with NDB was that if we invite an expert to host a workshop in a way that they've never done before, suddenly there's no teacher in the space. We all learn. And this flattens the room in a way that it becomes very creative, very daring, very risk-taking, and playful.
So I've experienced that, right? I ran a workshop I'd never run before a couple weeks ago. It kind of failed. And then I redesigned it. It did. It was there's a thing you experience where it's noodle arms. It's like dancing with a partner who has no frame, and you can't lead, and you can't,
Yes.
it was bleh. And I had the opportunity then to step back, change it, and try something else never done before, but informed by having aired. And I feel like what happened over the last 2.5 years in your community and mine and Dave's was that as facilitators, we've had rapid iterations, so that in the online space, what we're doing is so different. All the things you just talked about, right? The breakouts, the Zoom gods, the engagement, knowing that these things are needed, that there are need to be these shifts, is something that's in our bones. And I don't feel that that's the case for most of the rest of the world. And I'm also not entirely sure that those lessons don't actually apply back into the room now that we've learned them for the online space. I'm curious, as we go into this experiment, how do you see that gap, that distance maybe being crossed? Do we have an opportunity to do that?
Yes. Hell yeah. That's why we're doing it, right? I think that whoever experiences the depth and beauty and connection online workshop never wants to get back. And I think if more companies would dare to just take a small step of starting with small group breakouts at the beginning of a meeting, or would dare to use an online whiteboard even if it's just a Zoom whiteboard, something simple as that, to capture ideas and to bring a little bit of playfulness and creativity to their daily interactions. This would be such a game changer. And I'm almost on a daily basis in conversations with team leaders, especially more in the tech industry, who suffer from all hand meetings that waste the time of an entire organization every month. And they're desperate to find ways to create or redesign these all hand meetings to be engaging so that their staff members are actually looking forward to them and leave with a sense of progress or connection. And what I'm sharing with them is not rocket science.
So, yeah, because I want to go back, something you just said, small breakout rooms. It seems 2.5 years in. Doesn't everybody know about breakout rooms?
Nope. And fun fact, I was presenting at an online conference for facilitators, a large tech company addressing mostly facilitators. And I was the only speaker who used breakout rooms.
I saw that. I was shocked. I was shocked by that. I was like, what is happening?
Yes. And then I announced that there will be breakout rooms. And I already, over 2.5 years, I crafted the way how I introduced that so carefully to make sure that there's a minimum amount of people who drop out because they run away because they are scared. So what I say is, okay, let's imagine we are in the physical space. You enter the workshop room, you see all these chairs. What do? You sit down. What do you do next? You turn to your neighbor and say hello. So we're going to do that. And then usually I put them into breakout rooms and they stay. They all run away. And yes?
I think, and I know why, right? It's the noodle arms problem. So if we go to a conference and the expectation is everybody can be on mute and doing other work in the background, and you ask for engagement, that hasn't been trained. You haven't taught people how to lead. You haven't shown how to follow.
Yeah.
So you have this experience, and your community knows that when we show up, we show up.
Yes. And the beauty is there were a few, the majority stayed. And when they came back from this turn to your neighbor moment, they were like, oh, this was amazing. Suddenly all the cameras were on, people were engaged. And I think all we need is this very first experience for them to realize, oh, it's actually nice to be in a conversation with a stranger. And funny enough, before the pandemic, there was a big research, I don't remember in which paper it was published, about daily commuters. So they asked daily commuters, do you enjoy speaking to a random stranger on your daily commute? And the majority of people would say no. And then they asked them, do you think that you would be in a better mood after having a conversation with a stranger on your daily commute? No, because I enjoy reading my book. I enjoy being in my own space. And then they conducted a random experiment where they basically forced people to interact with each other on their daily commute. And there was a significant increase in satisfaction and happiness by those who were approached by a random stranger and involved in a conversation, and those who did it actively. And I think the same is true for breakout rooms. We believe that we don't want that and we don't need that. And once we experience it, we realize, oh, that's actually so nice and exactly what I needed.
So again, I want to go back to something that you just said about that parallelism or that transference that you are able to do and say, oh, when you go to a conference or when you go into a room and you sit down, you naturally talk to the person next to you. What is the break? Your best guess, maybe you have some science to back this up. Maybe you know why. What's the barrier for people? Because I don't think this is just people who had bad meetings in person and now they're having bad meetings online. I think this was also something that people who knew very well how to have a good meeting in person, and then when they were faced with their computer screen instead of a conference room, it seemed like noodle arms. But to some people, it was like, no, like you can do the equivalent of talking to the person next to you in a breakout room. You can do the equivalent of a post-up with a digital sticky note. But what's the blocker there? Again, not just among people who were in bad meetings, people who were in bad meetings. Why were people who even knew how to run a good meeting having so much difficult with the transition?
Imposter syndrome, expectations, being afraid of not being good enough, having nothing to share, and there's no escape. And I realized that my newest experiments are with activities that invite us to show our most mundane and imperfect selves. And one of those activities I actually copied from Jakob Cromie from Never Done Before, where in groups of two, you explain the most boring, mundane daily task in the most detailed way. And participants love it. They absolutely love it. And they fall in love with the person on the other side of the screen. And I thought about it for a long time to make sense of it. And what I came up with is that it gives us permission to just be ourselves. And it gives us permission. It even invites us to pull down all the masks. We don't need to be smart, be witty, be interesting, because our task is just to describe something very boring and mundane. And then seeing the boring and mundane in someone else, we realize, oh, it's just a human being as I am. And then suddenly we laugh about these small details. It's like stand-up comedy where we laugh the loudest if the comedian is sharing about something that is so normal and we're like, whoops, it's not only me. Does it make sense?
We
That's
have
a
it in
beautiful
common.
exercise. We should hold on to that particular activity because the experiment we're all engaging in is about ideation, right? And creativity. And there was earlier research, I would say about 10 years ago, that found that if you get groups, especially mixed hierarchy, CEOs and not, together in the room and had them begin by telling each other a story about a time, an embarrassing moment in their past, that it humanized and broke the ice and unleashed that creativity. I have always disliked that exercise because I find it very sort of offensive to throw people into a room and embarrass themselves. But this idea, I think, may achieve the same thing. What a fabulous thing to experiment with.
Yeah. And I experimented before with the activity. If you had a superpower, what would it be? Which is less daring and has the same effect because it flattens the room. I did it with in a bank where you had director level, really high stake people as many as interns. And when the director revealed his superpower he would like to have, suddenly everyone realized, oh, he's just a human being who also dreams of having a superpower. And he wanted to be invisible sometime, right? Kind of sharing. Sometimes I would love to walk into the office and nobody sees that I'm there. And suddenly everyone was very open to share their own aspirations for superpowers. And I think why this works to unleash creativity is that we then suddenly feel safe, and we can only think creatively and out of the box, air quotes, if we feel safe enough, because then it's not about survival. So we just have more brain capacity. I even read somewhere that it's a bad idea to introduce yourself with your name within the first 10 seconds of meeting someone. So if you just meet someone at the conference and say, hey, my name is Myriam, blah, 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 the person will never remember my name, because the first 10 seconds, the brain is just busy with finding out, is this person in front of me a threat? Do I have to fear for my life? And only if my brain checks the boxes, oh, it's safe, I can listen, then I have the ability to actually remember the name. That's why psychological safety is so important when we think of creativity.
That helps a lot. I don't remember people's names very well. Now I know why.
Yeah. You're too fast.
I'm gauging them up as a threat or not. So what have been some other maybe simple but effective responses? I think maybe both Elisa and I thought, or I certainly did, that Zoom rooms, people were getting that. Like, what's the little thing you can do, big value that that you found through the community?
Music. And funny enough, I tried recently, I was in a physical space with a group of people, and I tried the music thing. It's different. It's not the same. Or it needs much more equipment and talent, maybe. So on Zoom, I can be the DJ who fades out the music and who plays the music when they're coming back from the breakout rooms, just to set the atmosphere. It makes such a huge difference.
So it's atmosphere setting. Is it working music? Is it in the background when you're asking for somebody to do something, or is it
silent brainstorming? Yeah.
Yeah.
So silent brainstorming, I would always play music, because otherwise it's just awkward to sit there in silence. And then the impact of having fast versus slow music. So if I ask a group to cluster sticky notes on a whiteboard, I would rather use faster music in order to make it playful and speed it up. If I am asking a group to silently brainstorm for themselves, I would use slower music, and I'd choose either no lyrics or indigenous songs or African songs that nobody understands the lyrics, because this could be distractive.
Right.
So I've had really divisive experiences with music, and I think it's a fabulous vector for experimentation, because we hear from, in the meeting innovation community, when we run these things, I get a lot of feedback from the neurodivergent community, talking about how they had to mute everything because they couldn't handle my gosh awful, distracting Zen Guga music for their brainstorm. Just make it go away, or other people who are like, I'm so into the tune that I'm paying attention to where the song's going to head next. So there are so many frame settings. And I know we're bringing people in the symposium who are about how do you do the same thing with the physical space, right? What is the portal? What is the environment you can set if you walk into a space that's gorgeous?
Yeah.
And how, so that setting, that frame setting is such an interesting dimension.
Yes. So every person has different preferences and works better or worse in circumstances. Another thing that just popped in my mind is the arrangement of the chairs. So depending on if you're walking into the physical space, and then we're talking about priming, especially when we're running experiments where we want to compare online versus offline. So what is the priming effect of walking into an area and seeing the chairs arranged in a certain way? So if I walk into a space where the chairs are in rows, all facing in the same direction, I expect a lecture. So my brain will go like, okay, I can sit down and just zone out and listen. Whereas when I see a circle my brain might go on alert. Oh, time to be vulnerable. Where can I hide? And the small groups is like, oh, I need to be active and creative. And I wonder whether this might have an impact.
There's some good research on this. There is, in fact, and there are shapes that scream power.
Yeah, I'm not
right.
surprised.
So
yeah,
if you sit at the top center bit of a U-shaped table,
mm-hmm.
You own that room, right?
Yeah.
So what do we experiment with? Do we take the chairs away?
So somebody who runs something called Never Done Before, I think there's an element to what we're embarking on in January, a similar element. Why say yes to advise? And what are you most looking forward to?
Saying yes to advice, I think, is the most difficult thing ever for anyone. I don't believe in advice. That's why I work with questions much better than with answers or with advice, because with a question we leave the autonomy and creativity to find an answer to the person who receives. And when we receive advice, usually it evokes in us this feeling of, whoa, what do you know? So I think as human beings, we are very bad advice givers. So this would be my quick answer to why advice, or why not advice, but thinking buddies, co-creators, yes, co-designers.
So given the title of advisor on this project,
sparring partner.
Is that how you were able to say yes? You're like, okay, I'm going to push and shove and it's clay and we're going to play it with it, or?
Yeah, and I think how I usually give feedback then is very often in terms of questions or referring to my own experience. Here's what I have done. Have you thought of something? Because I think advising is a very difficult field. Why did I say yes? Because I think it's a fascinating topic. In my previous life, I was a researcher, so I designed experiments on different topics, but still now I work with creativity, and I'm fascinated to see what it is that triggers creativity. And I feel almost personally insulted when I read that online is killing creativity, because I have firsthand evidence that it doesn't. And I think we're missing a great opportunity on many levels if we shut down the opportunity to enhance creativity and to find different ways to measure creativity and to encourage creativity. Yeah.
Especially when you've seen what you've seen, which is that online is better. We can go places we can't go offline.
I hosted a workshop called Falling in Love on Zoom. And after 15 minutes, I had to tell the audience, no, please wait a moment. We still have 45 minutes. Don't fall in love just yet. Because they were so deeply engaged. I have some of the community members I've never done before. I've never seen them in 3D. I've never touched them. And still I feel so connected, as if they're my best friends. We laugh tears. So yes, it is possible. It exists, and it doesn't take much.
So what question are you most looking forward to finding either a new answer or a better answer to?
I guess, what invitations encourage creativity? And the reason why this comes to my mind is that often beginning facilitators come to me with a complaint, or the groups are not creative enough. They're not, the ideas are not good enough. There are not enough ideas. And I have the gut feel that it's not about the group, but it's about the facilitator. That we're very often asking the wrong questions and we're speaking out the wrong invitations. And I would be curious, and would actually be beautiful to find out not whether online or offline is better, but to find what is the invitation that boosts creativity online and offline equally.
I love that. I love this this perspective that, the question that we ask can be taken into any space. And so while in the experiment we may find that online or offline has some slight advantage, but the reality is we are in all of these places. So in every place, what can we translate? What can we transfer? Beautiful.
Thank you.
So a year from now, Myriam, we're in the same place, if that's okay, and we're having a cup of coffee, and the new rules for work experiment has gone extremely well. What's happened? What are we talking about? What are we congratulating one another for?
I think we're checking that box and thinking of the next experiment with having found that we can be creative in both places. What are the topics that make more sense online and what topics make more sense offline? Because I think, and hybrid, if this is a place, because I think both have their space and both are important, and we'll have both. And I think we haven't thought enough yet about what is appropriate or which space enhances certain behaviors better than others.
What's the most important job skill the next 5 years?
Job skill, facilitation. Are you surprised?
Okay, so you're biased. What's the next most important?
I'm not biased.
Why facilitation?
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
To me, facilitation is the ability to leverage the power of groups. So if you're a good facilitator, it means that you're a good listener. You're asking the right questions. You're able to synthesize. You're able to empower and encourage the group to go larger than their parts. You are a good delegator. You're not a micromanager by definition if you're a facilitator, because you're making the work for others easier. And I think if our leaders, our managers were better facilitators, we would have less meetings. We would have better meetings, be more creative. We would be able to bridge the silos, would be able to actually do the work after the meeting and after the workshop, and not use workshops and meetings as excuse for not doing the work. So yeah, facilitation is the 21st century skill.
And would you talk just quickly, because you mentioned in there leadership? I think I'm hearing more and more about facilitation as a leadership skill, where before facilitation was relegated to the person that you hired outside the company that came in and did a team building activity. Why or where is facilitation landing up on this leadership landscapes?
A leader is a leader because they are followers. So a leader is a leader because they are teams and they have to do the work the leader has, usually carries the responsibility, maybe has the vision, in order to make sure that this team is collaborating and lifting this vision, bringing this vision to life. They need certain skills to bring the team together, to make sure that everyone in the team is really using their talents in the best way. And for me, if a leader is a good facilitator, then all these meetings, all these one-on-ones, all these all hands will be more effective. And they will appreciate good facilitation, then they will, that's what I see, hire external facilitators for the more important workshops, because they recognize how important it is to have someone objective coming in from the outside and feel the ownership of the results and delegate the step from, okay, it was nice to have a workshop and to take all these decisions. And now what? Now we have to go back to work and actually implement. Makes
Did you
sense?
have something else, Elise? No, it does. It does.
I think you're right on, but I also think it's a fascinating perspective to hold as you look at the future of work and you look at what's happening with automation and artificial intelligence. The stakes for who we bring into the room and how we unlock what they do have gone up, because the machines can do the easy stuff, right? You can ask artificial intelligence, how do I run a good meeting? And it gives you a solid answer. It's a really good basic answer.
Yeah.
You don't need to be playing there. You as a leader have to pop it up.
Exactly. And as a leader, then yes, you have the AI come up with the agenda. And then as a leader, you can finally listen. You can listen, you can synthesize, you can ask the right questions, you can challenge the answers. Also, I think that in most meetings, most leadership teams are asking the wrong questions. If you ask a question that can be Googled, if you're asking a question for which there's a clear answer, then send an email. If you're sitting together in the same space at the same time, ask questions that spark wonder, that are worth a debate and a conversation.
And that take advantage of the minds that you've gotten. You're not paying these people to keep your doors open and your lights on and to Google things.
Yeah.
Myriam, if people want to find out more about you, more about the community, where can we send them?
Easiest is to LinkedIn, Myriam Hadnes, LinkedIn. Thank you.
Thank you for these insights, and for being a sparring partner with us and posing the right questions. You're welcome.
You're asking the right questions. Love that. Thank you for the opportunity. And I'm looking forward to the symposium and the experiment.
Thanks for listening. To learn about the new rules for work, purchase tickets, or submit your team for an experiment, check out newrulesforwork.com. If you're interested in partnering, reach out to us at info@newrulesforwork.com.